We're going to get straight into it now because it's all to do with art. And you can talk about the S&P being at 1800 and that's madness. You can talk about the Dow Jones being at 16,000 and that's madness. Of course, it's all to do with too much money chasing too few assets. But the art market has gone completely bonkers. Let me read you this. It says here, 3 studies of Lucian Freud by artist Francis Bacon were sold for, or was rather, sold for a record $142.4 million US just a couple of weeks ago at Christie's in Manhattan. What on earth could possess somebody to spend 1.5 billion rand on a couple of paintings by a bloke who's only recently died, I think. In the studio with me now is Stefan Hunt, the head of Sanlam Private Investments Art Advisory Services, and also looks after the art at Sanlam just up the road here in Cape Town. Stefan, thanks very much for coming in. I was sitting in your CEO's office, Jan van Zyl's office, not so long ago, and I looked up to my right and there was a beautiful picture there, and I said, that's a pretty picture, and he said, yes, it's an Irma Stern, it's worth, I think he said 15 million, or what, am I exaggerating?
I think you're exaggerating a little, but
It was a lot.
I think you can say that the art market here is as volatile and perhaps as hot as in the UK or in the United States.
Yeah. The other one that really caught my eye was the Warhol, which went for, gosh, what did it go? Let's go back now, 120 million for the screen, which was last year.
Lindsay.
And then Warhol, how much?
$105 million. If it's the one you're talking about.
Okay, there we go, 105 million. Yeah, the billion rand Warhol. But what we're trying to get across here, that people seem to be buying just because they've got the money to do so. Is it to do with that? Or are these artworks genuinely becoming so scarce and becoming so valuable that you have to pay up?
Well, let's put it this way, they're unique. Are as scarce as you can get them. And I suppose part of the whole world scheme about the art world, such unique pieces and being so heavily competed for, is making this market so rich in money. I suppose really the uniqueness plays in a very important role in those buyers' minds, because you won't find another one there. And certainly I think in currently when you're looking at those sort of figures in terms of buying those unique pieces, I think it demonstrates a certain amount of conviction also that this art market isn't just going to disappear overnight. I think where previously people were quite skeptical about a sort of bubble in the art market.
The great thing is it filters down to South Africa. I mean, Samantha, you've probably got a couple of pieces stuck away in the attic there, haven't you?
No, easy, Lindsay. I won't talk about those though, because then I'll give it away. But yeah. Save that for another day. Let's talk about what Christie's is saying though, because they're basically saying that it's not the top end of the market that is booming. It's kind of across the board, because they managed to sell 700 pieces for more than $1 million. It's not just about the $1 billion plus artwork that's selling.
Is that true? Does it filter down to different levels?
I think there's no doubt that the media obviously exaggerates the big price, big ticket items, and certainly in this country you'll get more reporting about that than about the other items. But I think of course it's selective, and Christie's is perhaps also blowing their own trumpet to a degree, in a sense, yes, that one does see a liveliness certainly in the contemporary market, and I think that's a very different market from the old masters market, for instance, where you've seen prices being quite depressed in a sense by comparison. So in that sense, I think there are quite a few anomalies in a way. One hears about what's very successful. You rarely hear about what is not going so well.
Stefan, I was going to ask you just that. In other words, we tend to hear in the media these fantastic numbers for a record price for an artwork. Do you come across exactly the opposite, where somebody bought an artwork for 100 million and then when it came to auction could only sell it for 20 million and ends up making a massive loss? Does that happen? And is it fairly widespread? In other words, do we have the sort of gambling syndrome where somebody only tells you about their winnings, they never tell you about their losses?
I think it's pretty true that most people won't want to tell you about their losses, and certainly there are instances where people have paid a lot of money and they come onto the market or they come onto the auction market and they very often don't sell. So has that person lost any money yet? One's not quite sure, but certainly by not reporting on it as actively as perhaps the great sales, one gets a skewed idea of it. But I think that across the market you'll always have opportunities where you can buy, so to speak, bargains. And even at the most recent sale up at Strauss & Company, one certainly saw an incredible price paid for a contemporary work by Jane Alexander, over the 5 million rand mark. And on the other hand, there were a number of works that were pitched quite high in terms of the estimates, but only achieved at the low end. So in a sense, yes, I think there are people that have bought too high in around 2008, 2009, where they were paying very, very high figures for well-known artists. I don't think they'll be easily achieved again. And in that sense, you won't see those works on the market, which also means, just as a final point, that good works are rare, and when they do come on the market, they achieve astounding prices, even here.
The good works do come on the market occasionally from an unexpected source, of course, because that extraordinary story of last week, where well, it wasn't from last week, actually, it was discovered last year, the flat in Munich, where hundreds of the most extraordinary artworks were found, Chagall's and Picasso's, Matisse, etc. That must have excited you.
I think it's a very surprising development in Europe, and I think it's going to become very interesting when they eventually release all the data about those works, and when they start tracing back where they came from, that it's taken so long for this person to eventually be revealed as the collector of.
He's been
so
selling
many
them off
items.
slowly, hasn't he?
Well, this is the interesting bit. So to some extent, you know, some people must have had an inkling or wondered why had this person been able to sell so many items over so many years. He was obviously very discreet in doing it, but perhaps there are more of these caches around. I wouldn't be surprised.
I think so. As I said, maybe in Sam's wardrobe or something, Sam.
Yeah, I'm one of those secret buyers who sends off people to the auction. I sit there with my phone just waiting to give them the green light to spend a few of my million, Lindsay, I wish. But Stefan, just one last question for you. I mean, they also talk about the fact that these state-backed museums from China to Qatar are also driving the sale of artworks across the world. I mean, is that an increasing trend? I mean, what kind of role do these rich and wealthy governments play essentially in the world of art?
I think they do play a role, but perhaps not as big as one thinks, because if you look at who's buying in the UK, in the United States, these are also very wealthy families. So yes, they do play a role, in the sense that it's money that wasn't perhaps there before, and certainly they are bidding for very specific historical items. And in that sense, we have seen it happening here in South Africa with the Irma Stern selling for 30 million rand in London of a Arab, or let's say an Arab priest in Zanzibar. Why was that of such interest to anybody? But it was of particular interest to the museum in Qatar, and they were prepared to pay 30 million rand, which is perhaps a drop in the ocean if you've got a budget of $1 billion.
I suppose that museum, I've heard that Museum of Islamic Art in Doha is one of the most extraordinary museums in the world. Stefan, just very quickly now, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, because I don't want to alert any of the cat burglars around Belleville at the moment. How much is your art collection at Sanlam worth?
Well, it's probably worth over 100 million at this stage. But, you know, it changes from week to week, like the stock exchange.
Yes, indeed. Stefan, thanks so much for your time this evening. That's Stefan Hunt from Sanlam. He's the head of Sanlam Private Investments Art Advisory Services, and also